over to you. And just a little background for everybody for tonight's meeting. The Deputy Mayor for Education's office had reached out to all of the ward ed councils, and they wanted to talk about the budget and share other information with us. And tonight, Paul Kine is at another meeting, I think, with one of the other ward councils. And Michelle is his chief of staff. So Michelle and Jen came this evening to share information with us about the budget. And I think we'll also have a little time to ask questions about the master facilities plan and the student assignment and boundary process. And then Kate Burkett is here from DCPS, and she came this evening because I asked if we could get someone from DCPS to talk about the work that they are doing to strengthen our feeder patterns. And Kate is here tonight to talk about that. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, and really appreciate the opportunity to chat with everyone. Like Suzanne mentioned, apologies, Deputy Mayor could not be here with all of our ed councils. We were double booked tonight, so y'all are stuck with me instead. But I'm going to go through a short presentation, just providing an overview of the mayor's proposed budget from the education and workforce side, and then we'll try to take down the slides fairly quickly so that we can answer any questions, get any thoughts, reactions, and then also save a little bit of space for MFP and boundary. We'll try not to take up too much time, given I know Kate is also going to be presenting on what sounds like a very important and big topic, so I want to make sure y'all have time for that as well. But with that, I'm gonna just share my screen just to walk through a few quick slides for you all. And as we go into this, I want to start by just setting a bit of the stage for the FY24 budget. We are right now coming through a period of time where we've been responding and recovering to the pandemic. We've had an incredible amount of federal relief dollars supporting us through these efforts. And we have seen that many of the investments that we've made during this time are achieving the results that we wanted to see. This is everything from the workforce development side, driving an inclusive jobs recovery, lowering our unemployment rates, bringing more visitors back to the district. And I think most importantly for this conversation and for this group, we are also at a period of time where we are actually seeing an increase in our public school population. Our public school population grew by 3% this year at a time when we were seeing declines elsewhere, both in our neighboring jurisdictions, but also across many large urban school districts themselves. We're very proud of the fact that our public school population continues to grow. And at the same time this year, we are faced with a much tougher financial picture. I think you'll have heard this from others, but in the February revenue forecast from the CFO, we did see a decline in revenues that we were not expecting of close to $400 million. And functionally, what that means for us in the inner workings of government is that about 6 weeks ago, we were sitting in budget conversations facing a $1.7 billion deficit. We had announced the UPSFF at that point. We had completed negotiations for many of our collective bargaining agreements. We were facing inflationary cost increases that were driving up many of the costs as a district that we know we had to budget for, and seeing a decline in revenue. At the end of the day, we did deliver a balanced budget, but this did include making some really tough decisions and tough calls as a collective group. That included $370 million in reductions to our government agency budgets, looking very closely at every agency's non-personnel spend, trying to take reductions there where we could, but also taking nearly 700 vacancies across our agencies. So these were positions that were not filled at the time. We tried to minimize impact to resident-facing services as much as possible, but these are positions within government that we had to take. And at the same time, through all of these tough trade-offs and making some of those tough calls around what positions to sweep, we have still been able to invest in many of our top priorities across the district. We'll spend a little bit more time on some of these today than others, but I did want to kind of just name the full swath, including our schools, our behavioral health services, both for students and for adults, out of school time programming, which I'll touch a bit on more later, affordable housing, our Vision Zero transit safety work, our legacy initiatives, and downtown recovery and food access. In the 24 budget, education does continue to remain a top priority. Some of you may have seen versions of this previously in previous years. Typically, education is near the top of the list, where we are seeing, human support services at the very top. Typically, that is our the required funding for Medicare, Medicaid, but then public education is coming immediately after that. And similarly, on the capital side, we also see that education typically does remain a top priority in this space across our entire financial plan, which includes FY24 to FY29. And then, oh, did I just lose my page? Can you guys still see it? No.
Oh, no.
Okay,
No.
let me see what happened. All right, let's try this.
We can see it now.
Perfect. And so double clicking in then to public education, I think this will be a familiar list to some folks. It's kind of been our set of grounding priorities and principles throughout the recovery, but we think about our priorities in 4 buckets, and we'll touch a bit on each of these in the following slides. But first, academic acceleration, making sure we're preparing all of our students for college and career, positive youth development and engagement, youth well-being and safety, citywide planning and coordination, and then, of course, the workforce cluster also sits within our purview, driving an inclusive jobs recovery. And so starting with academic acceleration, first and foremost, we have continued to make a historic investment directly into our public schools. So for the second year in a row, the mayor announced a 5% plus increase to our uniform per student funding formula, increasing the foundation level to over $13,000. This has meant our local public school budgets, so dollars going directly into DCPS and into our public charter schools, has risen by almost $200 million. And this is reflected on the left-hand side. You can see that we're at close to $2.4 billion directly into our local public school budgets. On top of that, this year, we had the second year of the Mayor's Recovery Fund with another $20 million investment. These were funds with local dollars that we added directly to our schools in response to the drawdown of federal relief dollars and ESSER funds that schools were starting to feel. And so that's about $10 million for DCPS and $10 million on the charter sector. That is, again, going directly to school budgets. Outside of the UPSF, our largest direct investment is in our teachers and in their compensation. And so we landed our collective bargaining agreement with the WTU, and what this has meant is a 12.5% raise for all of our teachers. And in addition to the raise for DCPS teachers, we are also investing on the public charter school side as well to ensure that public charter school teachers can also receive a 12.5% raise. So that's accumulating to $97 million going towards FY24 raises directly for teachers. As folks on this call may know, the WTU agreement also does include, on top of that, pay for increased benefits, stipends, and increased admin premium. And on the DCPS side, there is also 4 years of retro pay as well to cover the year-over-year increases since the last union agreement. And on the charter side, while we were not able to fully match that, we are adding roughly $20 million for public charter schools teachers to receive a 7.6% retroactive payment, which reflects about 2 of the 4 years that the WTU contract covers. In addition to direct pay for teachers, we are also really excited that we are launching what we're calling DC Teacher Academy, which is starting with a $1.6 million investment to create a teacher apprenticeship program that is district run. And so our vision really here is that we are ensuring that our DC students want to and can become DC teachers. And so the teacher apprenticeship program provides a tuition-free and paid pathway to become a teacher so that our high school students transition into programs in higher education that allow them to be apprentices, paid for that, and then eventually become DC teachers. We are also continuing to reimagine our system with the support of our federal relief dollars that we still have, though at a much smaller scale this year. We're continuing our multi-year investment in high impact tutoring, which has really started to see some strong results with a goal of reaching an additional 7,000 students in fiscal year 24. We're continuing our attendance nudge letters, which has been an evidence-based practice to help reduce chronic absenteeism. And OSSI is doubling the number of teachers who are taking the letters structured literacy training to reach over 500 teachers by the end of fiscal year 24, with $1,200 stipends for teachers for the completion of those programs. And we're really excited that we have been able to sustain much of our reimagining high school work, is what we call it. But this is a series of initiatives really helped at really driving how we are thinking about preparing students for college and career after they graduate from high school. So this has included expanding our dual enrollment offerings, offering advanced internships, work-based learning, and then an incredible initiative that we're really proud to have launched this past year with the Advanced Technical Center. So it's currently located at Trinity. It's providing students with both college credits, high school credits, and certifications across tracks in IT, cybersecurity, and home health. And then finally, out of our office, we are going to be launching an education to employment data system. And so, through much of these conversations, it is very evident that right now we do not have a clear automated way to understand what are the outcomes of how our education system and our workforce system is preparing our youth for careers. And so this data system will really help us understand students who are taking CTE programming in high school now, are they going into careers in those pathways? Students who are at the Advanced Technical Center, do they end up in careers in home health, IT, cybersecurity? And really ensuring that we have a shared understanding and picture of the ways that we are preparing our students and what is actually working to drive students into careers. The next set of priorities that we have is around youth development and engagement and youth safety and well-being. So I'll touch just on a few of these here. We are continuing our investments out of the Office of Out of School Time grants in youth outcomes with $17 million in continued investments directly in grants. 2.5 million of that new this year will be earmarked for supporting students with disabilities. So ensuring increased access to out of school time programs, ensuring we're building the capacity among our out of school time program providers, and that out of school time providers are trained to support students with disabilities. We're also very excited to be launching My After School DC. So we have $5 million this year towards what we're calling a down payment on this vision and goal, which is really to ensure we have universal access to quality after school programming for students at their school. And so the majority of these funds are going towards grants in year one, helping us think through different ways that we can increase access programming and work directly with school communities to have quality programs inside their schools. And some of the money is going towards the infrastructure building of what does it mean for us to define after school quality? What does it mean for us to stand up something like My School DC, which allows for a centralized hub by which families can access all of those programs? On the safety side, we're continuing our investment in Safe Passage, Safe Blocks with $9 million of continued investment here, and our DC School Connect microtransit program, which right now operates in wards 7 and 8, providing microtransit for students to and from school. And we're continuing our $38 million investment in school-based behavioral health. Importantly, this year, we are thinking about how we are reimagining that system and reassessing the service delivery of that system. The reality is that while we have enough funding to provide a mental health clinician in every single school, we are not meeting that commitment because we have so many vacancies. Right now, we have, I think, roughly 65% of our positions filled. and 35% of our positions are not filled. And so some of these dollars are going towards DBH really rethinking what is actually required for us to provide strong service delivery within schools. So a mix of that is workforce development, but some of that is also looking at the tiered supports that we have and which ones actually require a licensed clinician to do the work and which ones do not, and how are we granting out and giving out money in a little bit of a different way. I'll touch briefly on this because I'm sure we'll come back to this at a later page, but within our next priority of citywide planning and coordination, we have 3 big bodies of work that are all launching right now and will continue through to delivery in FY24, including our adequacy study, which is both going to be looking at current resource allocation within schools, but also thinking about what equitable public school funding really looks like for us to actually close the opportunity gap. Our master facilities plan, which is thinking about how are we effectively utilizing every school, how are we ensuring that schools are modernized and well maintained. And then our boundary study looking at the assignment policies, the ways that we are thinking about access to quality schools across the district. And I know we'll come back to this later. And then finally, I'll touch on our inclusive jobs recovery priorities. So we have 4 strategies here that we stood up during the pandemic that we are sustaining. First, driving a surge in high impact credentialing. So we have our DC Futures program, which will have $11.7 million to provide free associates and bachelor's degrees to 1,500 residents. Importantly, right now, we have about 133 paraprofessionals who are receiving their degrees through this program. We are continuing our work to connect job seekers with employers. Right now, we have a career coaches program through the Workforce Investment Council. DOES is continuing through their Office of Talent and Client Services to promote really strong hiring opportunities. And we are providing paid opportunities to learn at work. So again, this is a body within our Department of Employment Services that we've really thought about how we are strengthening, how we're targeting the right folks to make sure that we are providing opportunities for people to have access to jobs, subsidized access to jobs, but also opportunities for job training at the same time. And then finally, thinking about how our workforce development system is really driven by employer needs. So the DC Infrastructure Academy, for example, has strong partnerships with employers to ensure that the trainings that we are building are ensuring that residents are prepared for actual jobs with actual employers. And we're also creating a DC paramedic school, which will build on existing partnership between DOES and FEMS to create a pathway for folks to become paramedics. And then finally, I'll just conclude with kind of where we are in the process and the path forward. We have wrapped up now the budget oversight hearings for the education cluster. So we had a marathon session of public witness testimony on Wednesday, which I know some folks on here testified at. The government witnesses were on Friday. We're now headed into the period of council markups with then in May, the first reading of the budget, and assuming everything continues to work as planned on May 30th, council will have their final reading on the budget, at which point they will vote and we will have a passed local budget. So with that, I'm gonna pull down the slides. And I'm happy to take any questions, but also offer up Jen as well to answer any questions on the MFPM boundary.
So maybe I'll start out with a question and others should feel free. Actually, I'm going to let Elizabeth start out. She has her hand raised. I didn't raise my hand. So Elizabeth, you're first.
Thanks.
You beat me to it.
I'll take the window because my kids are relatively quiet this second. I have 2 questions. I'll just say them both now because, like I say, I don't know how long my kids are going to let me. I'm in the bathroom hiding. Number 1 is if you could talk a little more about the adequacy study in terms of like the timeline and how it's going to happen and kind of plan community engagement. I'm very interested to learn more about that process and how to kind of keep updated on it. And number 2 is for the teacher pay increases that were negotiated and that will hopefully be negotiated in the next contract. Just curious, because I know right now those are covered by kind of a separate pocket of money and not kind of going through the school budgets. So what is kind of the plan to ensure that when teacher salaries actually get a lot higher from the school side, that schools don't kind of keep a consistent budget, but end up losing a lot of buying power?
Thank you for both of those questions. Both really great questions. First, on the adequacy study. So I'm really excited that we just awarded the contract this week. So this is a great time for that question. We are getting started with this body of work, and I think there will be very significant engagement that is absolutely necessary throughout this work. And it will be a mix of both engagement with our school leaders, our school finance folks, and with the general public. So similar to, I think, what y'all may have seen starting and rolling out with the advisory committee and the master facilities plan, opportunities for public engagement and town halls throughout. We're thinking about this work in a few big prongs that I think expand it more from a traditional adequacy study, which is how we're, let's build a generic 500 student school and decide how to staff it and cost that out, and then scale it up or down depending on elementary, middle, high school, student demographics, et cetera, to having a similar version of that is what we call like an evidence-based approach. So what would it take, for example, to staff up a school that was fully implementing an MTSSS model, right? What would that look like for the staffing required for a school? And that is kind of the traditional adequacy study approach. But in addition to that, looking at things like, what have we seen from research and what has happened in other jurisdictions when there has been a surge in money that has gone into a city? And what has that actually driven in terms of not just student outcomes, but closing of the opportunity gap? There are pockets of examples where we've seen this happen. So if we apply that to DC, what does that actually mean? And then the third is doing a, frankly, like survey of practitioners, talking to folks, saying, all right, if your school community had a slightly constrained but additional amount of money, like what would you be prioritizing? If it had a less constrained pocket of additional money, what would you be prioritizing? If you were prioritizing teacher retention and recruitment, what would you invest in? If you were prioritizing student safety, what would you be investing in? If you were prioritizing mental health, what would you be investing in? And really using some of that to also triangulate and think about what are the investments as a district we need to be putting into our public school system. And then I think the third piece that has not been covered always in adequacy studies in full depth is thinking about the citywide investments that are also needed. We know that much of the supports for our schools, that especially those that have increased in need over the pandemic, are coming from other city agencies as well, right? Our nurses are coming from DC Health, our mental health clinicians are coming from DBH. And what is the investment needed there to actually ensure that we are providing the quality supports that schools need so that schools are able to focus on the instructional core as well? I'm trying to remember your second question now, but because I've gone
Teacher
down.
pay
Yes,
increases.
teacher pay increases. Yes, so right now it is sitting in the district budget. It's called the workforce investment account, which is where all of the collective bargaining agreements typically sit. Next year, it will be moved into the UPSFF, so it will all flow through the UPSFF. For DCPS school budgets, part of the reason why it didn't go in this year and why school budgets that folks LSATs were reviewing and looking at didn't have the average pay was to be able to keep things apples to apples. But next year, yes, importantly, and one of the guideposts and principles that we are thinking about as we think about the development of DCPS school budgets is that every budget will naturally have to grow at a minimum by teacher compensation, right? And making sure that we oftentimes call it buying power. The buying power of schools is not diminished because we know that a chunk of the increase in school budgets is going to be because we're just adding in the cost of the WTU contracts. So that's absolutely top of mind and going to be a barometer by which we are looking at school budgets.
Thanks so much.
So I have a question. When we looked at all of the schools in Ward 6, 8 of them have losses this year in their local school budget, and 5 of them had increases. So we've got 8 schools that are going to be losing, music teachers or PE teachers. Some cases it was a classroom teacher. And, they had passed the Mendelssohn's bill on, trying to keep budgets stable, but we're not seeing that. And then to see that there's, money going to other things, such as pay increases for the charter school teachers. How do we reconcile having, 8 schools just in our ward losing money next year? Is there any chance of, during this whole council process, of getting money added back in so that we can have all of our schools have stable budgets for next year?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. I think at this point in the budget formulation process, the budget is in council's hands. And there have been instances where they have changed and done things with individual school budgets. So I think that is the answer to your final question. I think in terms of the losses that schools are feeling, these are absolute, like, real losses that schools feel when their budgets go down. And as a system, the budget model as we've designed it is to ensure that, to a degree, like our UPSFF, dollars are following students where they're going. And so schools may lose money if they're losing overall enrollment in students, if there's a change in student population needs. And third, and I think this is something that we are experiencing over the last couple years and this year, there is a drawdown in the one-time funds that schools received. So in 22, we had a massive surge in ESSER funding that went directly into school budgets. We have been offsetting some of that and not all of that with our local one-time funds through the Mayor's Recovery Fund, both last year and this year. I think we never expected that we would be able to sustain it fully from FY22. And so what we are trying to do is have a slower drawdown of that, but a drawdown still does mean that schools feel losses to their budgets.
Are there other questions for Michelle? Anyone on the line?
Hey, Suzanne, I have a question.
Go on, George.
All right, so going back to my after-school DC and continuing with that theme in Ward 6. So we have several schools that currently fall under the out-of-school time under DCPS. Other schools have independent providers in terms of their aftercare, and Maury is one of those schools. How will my after school DC, I'm trying to think of the best wording here. How would my after school DC work in terms of families registering? Will that only be for the out of school time locations, or are you encompassing all of the different aftercare providers in the city?
Yeah, that is, I think you're getting at the heart of really what the goal of my after school DC is, which is to create, I think, a level of coherence across the system, knowing the multitude of providers and funding streams that we have, right? There are after school programs that are funded through DCPS out of school time. There are after school programs that are funded through the Office of Out of School Time Programming. There's programs that DOES runs. There's programs that DPR runs. There's programs that school communities stand up and fund themselves through their own nonprofit organizations. And right now, understanding the full system for a family can be very complicated. And so we do want my after school DC to be a centralized one-stop shop to be able to understand and access programming. I think I like to think about it almost in the lens of our public school system to a degree, right? Like you have your by right access and you have a lottery system by which you can access other citywide opportunities. And so we want every kid to have by right access to an quality after school programming at their school. And then for us to also have citywide programmatic options if you really want gymnastics and that is not what your school is offering, right? That is what we are then supplementing with grant funding across the system. but the hub itself to be able to support all of the different types of after school programming that we have in the district. And I think we have, to be clear, a lot of work to get there. I don't think we'll get there in 1 year, but I do think it is important for us to start and endeavor down this road.
Do you expect
you.
that to be up and running next school year, or will it be the following?
So the grant funding will go out for this upcoming school year, assuming all goes well with what the final budget proposal is. And I think both the technology development, but more importantly, I think the intellectual work of creating cohesiveness across the system will start launching in 24. And I think the technology piece will be fairly straightforward because we have a strong launching pad of the existing My School DC system.
Are there other questions for Michelle?
I see 2 hands raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing them, so I would have all of them.
It's me. I'll
Okay,
just,
Sandra, go.
yeah, I'm just curious about is it a new data system to track students through career, right? Is that not an OSSI data system?
So it is going to connect multiple existing data systems. So OSSI has their student longitudinal educational data system. DOES has their workforce system. UDC has their enrollment system. We have multiple systems across the district, but they're not speaking to each other right now. And we have unemployment data where we know information about folks' wages and employment status. We have clearinghouse data, et cetera. We have all of these systems, but they don't talk to each other, have a common identifier indicator. So it's building a new system in that it's building on top of all of these, but it is not recreating any existing one of them. It's helping us actually connect the information that exists within all of these.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So Elizabeth, is your hand raised for a new question or? Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on kind of what you were saying around, the funding decrease for some schools and the fact that it's kind of coming from, we had these increases in ESSER funds, and then the mayor's recovery funds kind of are winnowing us down from there. And I just I'll share from my own school's perspective that our funding last year, when the mayor's recovery fund brought us up to 100% of the previous year plus some, that level of funding felt like not what we needed for recovery, but just what we needed for our basic, okay, we felt okay, this is what we really need. This is the funding level we need to actually do kind of our due diligence and offer what we want to offer as a school. And I know a lot of schools felt that way, or even still didn't feel like it was enough, right? And so coming down from that, we feel okay, we're now back to cutting things that feel core to what we want to be doing and providing. So I just want to share that experience and hope that the adequacy study is able to unpack and get at some of those and ultimately get us to a place where we're not feeling we never have enough, that we should really be funding schools adequately. And so wanted to say that, and I think I have another thing, but I can't remember right now, so I'll stop there.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, I think the adequacy study is one piece, because I think there is the reality that we all are living every single day, which is you can't separate the both the trauma that our students, teachers, everyone endured over the last couple of years and be okay, to deal with that, this percentage of it is recovery and this percentage of it is not. It is what we are all navigating, and the federal funds helped us with that. And we have an ongoing reality that we are all dealing with. So I appreciate you sharing just the lived experience that you are having right now.
It looks like Pam and Valerie have their hands up. So Pam, you want to go first?
I think Valerie had her hand up first.
Oh, did she? Okay, Valerie.
Pam, you take it away.
I don't know if it's just me, but if the money follows the child. And I think that you said that a lot of times that we are losing funding at schools because students are moving to citywide schools, but more here in Ward 6 seem to be moving to the public charter schools. Seeing that they do flow and that funding does flow, what type of precedence does it set if we do the lottery before open enrollment for DCPS? It's like a free fall at the end of the day for principals, for staff, or for anyone that is left after the lottery. If if it didn't go your way, or just the mass exodus. So once other families hear, oh, this family is going to bases, or what happened to my children in a 3rd grade, because there was a mass exodus to a public charter school, everyone that was still left, they were like, wow, should we still stay here? The morale and just everything that goes on for those of us who are sticking with DCPS, we're left like, okay, so how do we revamp, helping the principals and everyone, regroup, and then try to put on a happy face to say, hey, we're still great. But you just saw this mass exodus, particularly in Ward 6. We have a great group of students, but it's hard to compete when the lottery happens before open enrollment. And I know it's probably like a toss-up for you guys. However, I must say, it for the cluster schools, it's really hard to compete because we are seeing that big mass exodus. And so I don't expect you to have a solution. I just want to put it out there that it is really hard competing after. I can understand with the city schools, that's one thing. It's still DCPS, but competing with also the charter schools and all of those other things after all of 3rd grade is gone, because they need to get into whatever school by 4th grade. Now we have all of these students and they're gone. So just putting it out there to keep our piece from the cluster schools.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really interesting, and I think it touches on quite a few bodies of our work to think about that dynamic and perspective of it, because it's both like, what are we doing and how are we supporting and strengthening our neighborhood schools, and what are we doing when schools are experiencing declines in enrollment? Like, I know it touches Jen's work on the boundary side, it touches the adequacy study work as well. One of the pieces we've been thinking about is like, there's declining schools and there's small schools, and what are we doing to sustain our small neighborhood schools as well? So thank you for that.
All right, Valerie, and then we're going to have to end this discussion because Kate has to leave at 8. So Valerie.
Yeah, so I want to piggyback onto what Pam said, because my kids went through the cluster school and it was really hurtful to them. It was really hurtful. The talk on the playground that the kids themselves were doing, and just, it was really demeaning the school and the teachers and other students. It was really hard. But let me go to what I was going to ask about, which is related. And it's about how this process is tilted in favor of choice as opposed to the schools of right. There is an interesting way in which the DME has talked about the goals of the boundary process. And one of them is to set out that there's equitable access. I'm quoting from the press release as well as all the websites. There's equitable access among district students to high quality public schools, which sounds fine, except that's not what DC code says is the DME's duty with respect to the boundary review. The code says that whether there is equitable access among district students to high quality DCPS schools. So it's as if the whole idea of this boundary review is just to figure out better ways to help choice. And that's the way I look at it. there's no reason to edit out DCPS from that. And the DME has done that. I don't really understand why, unless it is to actually just, validate choice over the people who actually choose their in-boundary schools, like I have, like Pam has, like Suzanne has, like Sandra has. We care about these schools a lot, but more importantly, it is something that every student in the District of Columbia is entitled to have in their neighborhood, and they don't, and they won't if they keep not getting supported adequately.
I can go ahead. Hi, everybody. So thanks, Valerie. That's helpful. I think there's a couple things. So one is the way DME and the way DME talks about choice is there is choice in where students go to school, whether that be their by right school or otherwise, right? So number one, when we talk about choice, there is active decision making on where families choose to send their students to school. And I think the boundary study has a lot of opportunity, the boundary and student assignment, right? We often shorthand it to boundaries, but the student assignment is as important on the enrollment policies. And because we look at the public school system as a whole with DCPS and charters, we think we should consider public charters as well as DCPS citywide schools when we look at that third access to equity and quality. So I think it's an opportunity to think about how families choose schools and ways to help strengthen. It's not trying to move away from by right schools. We believe that's a cornerstone of our system. But there's also the reality that we have, many different schools to choose from, both DCPS citywide and charter citywide, and we should be thinking about that as we do this next study.
So
Are charters really equitable though? Considering that they're funded differently, are they actually equitable? I understand the city schools, but how are, and I'm by no means putting them down at all, but I don't think that we can use the word equitable for charter schools. I mean, and that's just me. Yeah.
So I think maybe I misspoke. What I'm talking about is equitable access. So that's what we want to be thinking about. And we can go into how charters are funded versus DCPS. And, Michelle touched a little bit on the Uniform for Student Funding formula and so forth and so on. But the point of that third goal is looking at how families have equitable access to quality schools. And in this case, we're talking about both the whole system.
So this may be a good time to switch over to Kate, because I think one of the reasons families have left DCPS at the middle school or high school levels is because there isn't consistency in programming from elementary to middle to high school. So I'm going to turn this over for a quick discussion with Kate since she has to leave. And Jen, I don't know if you can stay on the line. There may be some more questions about the master facility plan.
Yeah.
All right, Kate, I'm sorry that.
Hi, good evening again. So I thought we actually could start off with just if anybody had specific questions. I want to make sure I kind of tailor this discussion to what you all want to know about. When this was first presented to me to, attend the meeting, I think it was, surrounding an advanced Spanish discussion, potentially for a Ward 6 middle school. Want to make sure that that's, what you all are interested in, or are there other questions?
I will say, I think we're interested in this broadly, not just with language immersion programs,
Okay.
but I'll speak for myself. I mean, our organization has worked for years on trying to strengthen the feeder patterns. We did a middle school principals discussion, so people understand what we have to offer at our by right middle schools. We do many things, but we can only do so much. And I think DCPS has to be the one that works to strengthen the feeder patterns. And so we're really looking at this broadly.
Okay. So I wonder if I'm even the correct person. So I work very specifically on world and dual language, and am definitely happy to talk about the efforts that we have in place at our middle schools pretty much, so that we can ensure that we have access from elementary schools, particularly Tyler Elementary is a dual language program in Ward 6. And so we are working on an advanced Spanish/Spanish humanities curriculum, so that those students do not have to travel to McFarland, which would be the feeder middle school for any dual language elementary student, since it is far away. If students would like to, they certainly can travel there, but we are working just so that students have another option that's closer to home. And so that's something that we're hoping for next year. And, kind of from a language learning perspective, we're hoping to build up the trajectory so that we're preparing students to take an AP class either in their, at some point in their high school career. I would say either, in ninth grade, if they are exiting a dual language immersion situation from pre-K to eighth, or, their junior, senior year, if they're starting with world language when they are in middle school.
So where are you doing this for the middle school with Tyler?
So we are hoping that it will pilot at Jefferson. So we're working with Jefferson Middle School right now. I definitely can't, speak for the folks at Jefferson, but we have spoken with them about creating a small class and cohort for those students, not just students exiting Tyler. It would be any student that demonstrates an intermediate mid-level of proficiency. So that could be really, a native or heritage speaker of Spanish, somebody who is exiting a really strong elementary world language program, that they would be potentially able to enter into that advanced or Spanish humanities class.
I will say this is such a broad topic that, I've reached out to DCPS to find who could we have come talk to us about strengthening the feeder pattern. And you were the one that they suggested for tonight.
Well, Tyler is a very, I think it's a hot button topic, just thinking about, where can these students go, since McFarland is the by right kind of dual language school for students, and it's a little bit far away. And so Jefferson, would not be a dual language school. They wouldn't qualify for that. You have to have a certain number of courses in the target language. But just offering kind of that advanced Spanish study, so we don't feel like the kids are, exiting this excellent program at Tyler and then starting over in a Spanish 1 class, which they would have, more proficiency than other students who are kind of starting from square one.
George, are you trying to ask a question?
Yes, I wasn't trying to interrupt you. I just had a general question just for my own clarification. At the elementary school level, is each school required to have a world language? And I'm not talking about dual language like Tyler or
right.
Bancroft currently have.
Right.
I'm just saying, just world languages in general. Is that something that's
unfortunately no. So we really, appreciate our programs that are in our elementary schools, and we, really appreciate when parent organizations are able to prioritize and push to continue to have world language programs, but they unfortunately are not a requirement. So sometimes I do think schools have to make difficult budget decisions, and they do cut elementary world language programs.
Mm-hmm. And then a follow-up question, if you may, and it's kind of along the same subject, but maybe a little off. So every year there has been that World Language Festival. Last year it was at Planet Word. Is that something that DCPS is doing again for this year?
We are. We actually are doing it on Friday, April 28th. It will be at Planet Word once again. So we had been advertising this to teachers and schools kind of since January, roughly. So we are gearing up to have that festival. I hope, were you able to attend last year?
I was able to attend. It was on weekends,
Yeah.
so
We wanted
see
to
you
make sure we
changed-
could get more students that were able to go, so we moved it to a Friday.
I understood.
So Kate, can I just ask, do you know beyond language acquisition, what efforts DCPS has to strengthen the feeder patterns?
So, you know, I really don't want to feel, or I don't want to speak to what other like content areas might be doing. And I can certainly, you know, relay the message that you all would like to speak with somebody who maybe oversees all of the content teams, as opposed to, you know, somebody who works directly on just one individual content team and kind of has like a really specific focus. And so I can definitely, you know, relay that message so that maybe next month, somebody who can speak to some of that work can come.
Okay, that would actually be very helpful. Because I think your piece is one piece of
Certainly.
strengthening the feeder patterns, but it can't be the only piece.
Yes, no, of course. Yeah. But I think perhaps in the email thread, folks thought that there were questions about advanced Spanish offerings for Tyler students.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, Kate. I know you have to go, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
appreciate you being on
Yep. Well, have a good evening, everyone.
already.
Bye.
You as well.
So I think there's still some continuing questions and discussion about the boundary committee and student assignment process. Jen, you're still on the line, is that right? And Michelle?
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay. Valerie, did you have I don't know that we really got to fully flesh out your question about what's in the DC code on the boundary review process.
My point was that, you know, the code is explicitly mentions DCPS school, high quality DCPS schools. I don't have it right in front of me. And that DCPS part has been, you know, edited out to be just high quality schools. To go back to my problem with this, aside from the fact that the DC code says something that the DME is not following, is that in how we talk about schools of right, we talk about them as just another choice. But in fact, the DME, and this is not just this DME, and Jen, you would know this because you've worked for multiple DMEs, but it's been, you know, over years that the measurement of I don't know, of weight, let's say, is called the in-boundary participation, as opposed to in-boundary enrollment. And I have a real problem with this because there are a lot of low enrollment schools, particularly in Ward 7 and 8, but also in Ward 6, that have high in-boundary enrollment, but not high in-boundary participation. And this is a problem if you are considering that in-boundary participation is more, you know, more important, because then you're prioritizing a certain degree of choice, as opposed to the choice exercised by people who are actually attending the school. It's the difference between the people who are inbounds, who are electing to go, who are choosing to go, versus the people who have actually chosen to go. And the reason this is such a critical difference is because it has resulted in school closures. And there are now entire neighborhoods in DC that don't have schools of right. So, you know, it's looking at a not growing student population. And I worry about how all of this is talked about, because schools of right are not just another school. They're schools that students have access to by law. And it's important that they are equitably resourced and treated across the city. And we know they aren't. If you go to an elementary school in Ward 8 that hasn't been renovated, it's not going to look like Lafayette in Ward 4 or Janey in Ward 3. It's just not. And that's just on the look of it, and that doesn't even get into the programming. So, I feel like the buy right system is not just a cornerstone, it's foundational. And I don't know how that is being represented in this work. So I'm sorry, that was a long way to say, I don't know how that's being done.
I think you bring a lot of good points. Can you guys hear me okay? No. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. I think I'm trying to think of which part to tackle. And I do want to talk about master facilities plan because I think it's a real opportunity that we're able to do the MFP and the boundaries together. So I think the DME, this DME and earlier DMEs agree that the neighborhood schools, the schools of right, are cornerstone foundational, use whatever semantics you want, that it is the basis, the foundational basis of our public school system. I think that, I like to geek out on the boundary participation, whether we use the denominator as the school or the denominator is the students that live in the boundary, and we look at things both ways. I think to talk about what you were just talking about with Kate at DCPS about feeders, I think this time around, we're going to be spending a lot of time looking at feeders and feeder participation. And one thing we're really looking forward to is differentiating sort of participation at the secondary level by both feeders, students that have moved on from the rising grade, as well as those who are new and out of boundary. Right now, we sort of shorthand it by just saying out of boundary. We don't differentiate who have followed the feeder patterns. So I think there's going to be a real opportunity. We're doing a lot of data work trying to set that up so we can do that more regularly with a lot of thoroughness and put into Edscape. So I think there's another opportunity too with the master facilities plan, Suzanne, because I know you said you want to talk about a little bit of really focusing on the modernization status of where we are with our schools across the board and thinking about what's happening to our schools that have declining enrollments for a variety of reasons, and to see how what needs to happen with them with modernization and how the PACE legislation right now is written. So I think there are also real opportunities there. And one thing that the DME hasn't done a lot of in great detail since the 2018 MFP is really take a critical look at those modernization, small cap and that kind of stuff. So I think there's going to be a real opportunity to dig into that, which we haven't done now in about 5 years. So that'll be good. So I know that doesn't cover everything that you wanted, Valerie. I hear you. I have been talking, I think, and listening to you for many years now. And so I think I understand where you're coming from. And I think there's an opportunity with these two studies in the areas that you're most interested in.
Do you think, what do you think the opportunity is, Jen?
I think there's a couple opportunities. I think one opportunity is, especially with the boundary and student assignment study, because it attracts such attention, is we're going to be able to have a real citywide conversation about how to best support our schools, be that both our boundaried by right schools as well as our other citywide schools. I think there's going to be a real opportunity that we haven't had in the last 10, it's been 10 years since we've been able to do that. And we're planning on doing a lot of the engagement very similar to how we did it before. So I think there's going to be a good opportunity there. And then I think there's a lot of opportunity, particularly around the MFP, not just the modernizations and small cap, but looking at maintenance, which we did not look at in 2018 to the level of degree that we're going to be doing this time. So I think that's going to be a real opportunity too.
Well, can I ask you what the DME said at the hearing the other day, where he said, we have enough schools in the city, in my opinion, or something like that? Yeah, I mean, that was kind of amazing to me, because nobody in your office has control over the charter sector at all. I mean, you can advise, you can give them data, but I mean, whether you agree with your boss or not, I mean, it's irrelevant, because I don't understand how this infinite growth is supposed to work.
Yeah, and I saw Sandra also drop something about the openings. I mean, I think this deputy mayor in particular over the last couple of years has been very clear on his concern about the supply of schools and efficiencies and so forth. So I think that's been clear, and he reiterated it again. I agree, Valerie. Maybe Councilmember Fruman asked him. I can't remember who asked
He
him the
did.
question. Yep.
The-
And
the
so, yeah, I think
problem- one of the problems, Jen, is that the public charter school board just frankly ignores what he says.
I know what you're talking about. I know what you're referencing. I remember that very well. I do think there is an opportunity, though. Sorry to use, I'm not trying to overuse the word, but I genuinely believe this. That it is a different group of people. And I agree with you, Valerie, that, you know, in the end, the deputy mayor's office does not vote as a voting member on their board, right, to decide on any charter applications. But I do think there is a level of cooperation that we have with this new group, and this sort of refocus that the public charter school board has on trying to look at data that is above and beyond applicants, right? Just saying we have a good program, right? So let's just keep opening and opening. I think they have it seems to me they have a different perspective. And I believe it's one applicant this time around, which doesn't negate, I think, Valerie, your point about sort of what the processes are. But I think for this upcoming cycle, I do think there's only one application in the pool. What I am frankly, as a part of the planning group, most interested in though is replications. That's what I'm interested in, and sort of other sorts of evolutions that the charter sector has above and beyond just new applications, which is what we focus on a lot. But a lot of the changes that have happened over the last few years has been
They're
replications.
getting ready to expand Yu Ying. Washington Latin just opened a new campus. I can't even keep up with all of the new expansions that they've approved. And they are moving in a direction of approving expansions instead of just new schools.
Yeah, so I think we want to at least have a public conversation about that. We also want to look at DCPS on where there has been suggested growth. It is much smaller, but where does that also make sense or not make sense? So
I think I'm concerned about the expansion of both DCPS and the public charter schools. And unfortunately, I think with DCPS, much of it has come from just a survival instinct. They're trying to, create, attractive citywide high schools with Bard and with expanding Banneker, and now this new MacArthur Boulevard with a substantial out of boundary set aside. DCPS is doing what they can to try to keep, students in the system, and they're trying to compete, and it makes them not make good decisions either. So
can I give one sort of reaction to that, Suzanne? I think that's all very helpful. And I think, again, this is an example of something that we will be able to have sort of a citywide conversation about in the boundary and student assignment process, because I think there are multiple tensions. So MacArthur, to me, is a solution for overcrowding in Jackson Reed. And I think the question then becomes is how big is MacArthur going to be, right? And there's been multiple numbers that have been bounced around. 1,000 was being bounced around in the beginning. And as I understand it now, 800 is the number that they're landing on. That's what I understand. But that is to solve a overcrowding, which for those that have had any conversations with the former Wilson and then Jackson Reed feeder pattern stuff, that's been an ongoing question. And I think the examples of Bard, and tell me your other one that you said, Bard, what was it? Oh, Banneker, that's right. I'm going to use Bard in particular, I think, because this is something that is part of I was just looking at the recommendations from 2014 in the boundary and student assignment, and I think it's going to come up again and we get lots of advocacy for this, is that are there sort of these specialized programs within DCPS, people are asking, in all sections of the city, right? In all feeder patterns. But I think what they really mean is all sections of the city, right? And so that, right. And I don't know if it's not, it could be construed as competition, but families are also asking for it to a certain degree. So I think there's these tensions of of how to meet family need and support our system and support and look at all of our schools in the system, right? And so I just think there's these pushes and pulls that happen, not just across DCPS and charter, but within DCP and within charter LEAs too, right? This is so our hope is that as the DME, we're able to look at it comprehensively and try to have a conversation that sort of weighs these different priorities and guiding principles, if that makes any sense to you. But this is something that we're grappling with.
I have a
Hey,
question.
Suzanne, can I?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, let's let Gail go and then we'll go to you, George.
Go
I
ahead,
know
Gail.
hi, everyone. Sorry I'm late.
Hey.
I know a student at Stewart Hobson applied to McKinley. McKinley didn't accept him, but McKinley told the student's mother, go to the new school they built over there. What is that? Is it MacArthur or whatever the new school's name is? So for other schools to be making those suggestions, I thought that was interesting. And one other thing I have, the way the wards changed during the last census, as we go forward, as the ward changes, do the feeder schools change with it?
Yeah, we've had a couple questions about how the ward redistricting works with the school boundary looking at it. And it's a good question. It's not apples to apples in that because, I'm going to use wards 7 or 8 changed in particular, right? And ward 6 got smaller. Does that necessarily mean that school boundaries will change like that? I think the answer is no. That's not, we don't have to create, right? It is by law that the wards have to be within some plus and minus 1,000 residents of each other, trying to make them as equal as possible. We do, however, want to think, and this is what we talked about 10 years ago, and we're going to want to talk about it again, is, and you hear about this a lot about HD Woodson, the feeder pattern there, right? Like, is it big enough? Is it big enough to sustain the schools that they have? So there is this question of sort of supporting our feeders, but they don't have to be equal in size. We are not interested in making one particularly lopsided. That doesn't make any sense, but it's not a one-to-one. Sorry, I need to get that answer a little tighter because it comes up a few times, but if that helps, Gail.
It does. Thank you.
Hey, George, do you want to ask your question?
Yes. So continuing on that MacArthur, Jackson Reed situation, and it will, and I'm only using that as a lead into my question. So I understand the situation with the overcrowding at Jackson Reed, but then keep in mind you're talking about overcrowded middle schools in that area and overcrowded elementary schools in that area. You're making reference to Janney and Murch and Lafayette, who have done renovations within the last 5 to 6 years, and they're still running near capacity. So my question is, will the facilities plan and or the student assignment plan discuss those scenarios where you have current schools that are close to or at overcapacity?
Yep. Thank you for the question. Yes, looking at sort of full and not full and trying to think about ways to support those schools. And I just want to circle back too on your point about looking at the status of modernizations and the amount of funding and where it's happening. I was on a panel with Mary Filardo and a custodian, I think it was from Powell, at the state board a month or two ago, because they're also looking at facility work. And President Thompson asked, why is Plummer so low on the list, right? And so it looks like one of the reasons that Plummer is low on the list in the PACE modernization is because its enrollment is not growing, right? Its enrollment has been going down. And so therefore it gets weighted lower than other schools where where they're more crowded. And I think this is an opportunity to sort of look at what those impacts of those legislation, those metrics are going forward to make recommendations. And it's something that we have a public conversation about, right? This is something, there's trade-offs about how to do this. So I think this is an opportunity again to look at parts of the city that we don't think have gotten the investments that as equitably as other parts of the city. And I think we should be looking at this time around, which I think is good.
I agree with that, Jen, because frankly, some of the biggest problems in terms of low enrollment are in wards 7 and 8. And
Secondary in particular, yeah.
And there's so many things that are being done by the city that just, I think, lead to declining enrollments in wards 7 and 8. And one example I'll give is having an at-risk preference to when you go into the lottery. I think on the surface, that sounds great. But when you really, really think about an at-risk preference, those students are likely coming from wards 7 and 8. And you're just going to be leading to lower and lower enrollments at those schools when, families decide to leave. And, it really is so wrong because the most vulnerable children continue to be left behind. And we're also forcing families in wards 7 and 8 to have to travel long distances to get their kids to schools that they feel are, adequate for their children. So I would, during the performance oversight hearing, Quabila Huddleston, who commented or testified, I mean, she called some of the trends alarming, and she was, crying out for leadership in this city to look at what is happening in Ward 7 and 8 and Ward 5 too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I do want to flag though, Suzanne, that this is again, the tensions with our historic residential segregation, right? Our city is incredibly segregated and is certainly segregated by income, that to not give families opportunities to choose to have opportunities otherwise, to me is a mistake. Now, with that said, I do hear you that you would need to be able to give them supports and make their own schools very strong nearby, that they would want to be able to go there. No one is arguing with that. But at the same time, well, I mean, that's where I think we just keep having the conversation and figure out how to keep improving.
Valerie posted in the chat Quabila's testimony. I just see policy after policy, decision after decision coming out that continues to hurt the schools in Ward 7 and 8. And not a lot of, moving them up on renovation schedules or, adding additional programming, additional safety measures, whatever those families want in their neighborhood schools, so that they can feel that it is a real choice for them to stay at their neighborhood school.
Yeah, well, I want to keep talking about these things. And again, I think these are opportunities. I think I think Michelle did a nice job of highlighting the DME's priorities through the budget. So safety and other supports at schools are paramount for us. Reimagining high school also is something that I think is going to be a real opportunity to think about as we think about the secondary schools and ways to best serve our kids. So
I have another question. Can I ask another question?
Keep opportunities.
Please?
Yes, Gail.
My son was on the swimming team, and we had to go over to Woodson, where normally we were going to Dunbar. And when Stewart Hobson had their high schools, it seems like none of the schools except for Ron Brown even came from 7 and 8 that came to any of those, invites, tell us what's going on with your school. So that's just one issue that I thought was very weird. I had no idea what Woodson or Ballou or, schools offered because they didn't come and didn't tell you. So once I'm sitting over there with the swimming, I didn't know they had this extensive IT program. So I just wonder sometimes is what that schools offer once you get towards 7 and 8, if anybody knows what they have over there. Even some of the parents in 7 and 8 don't even know what they have over there. So I don't know if that's could be relevant as to what do you offer, but if your 7 and 8 parent want to come across the bridge, do they not know what the schools offer where they are? Do they even look to see what's over there? Or do any people from the other wards even look to see? Everyone just assumes that it's so, I'm gonna say the word bad. And so we don't even look to know what they offer. So is that something that ever comes up in these discussions?
Yeah, I mean, I think as part of the reimagining high school work, there is also looking at like I think Gail, you started talking about like pools and recreation opportunities, but also like what are the course offerings? And right now there is not a like full directory, let's say, of course offerings. And OSCE in this, I think this might actually be the first year of it in the capital plan, is building out a course data collection system to again know what are the courses that we are offering across the district. And to the earlier conversation around the education and employment system, like that is also going to be a core piece of this, right? Like what are the courses that we are offering, including some of the CTE courses that are then driving outcomes. And I think one of the pieces around the reimagining high school work and some of the pathways that we are pursuing there is like, we don't want students to have to leave their school in order to access some of these specialized programs that we know not every school can and will offer at scale. We cannot expect every single school to have a thriving cybersecurity program, every school to have a thriving robotics program, every school to have a thriving AP Italian program. But there are some of these things that we can offer centrally that students don't need to change schools for, right? Like the ATC is something that students are going to in their last period of the day from their existing school, and they're not transferring or changing schools in order to access it. We're looking at like a virtual course hub and thinking about virtual courses in a bit of a different way of, can we offer some of these AP courses that maybe there's 2 students at a high school that are interested in because it's a more specialized offering, or the school has smaller enrollment that we can offer through a virtual platform. So the student is still getting the AP credits without saying, well, now I need to transfer or change schools in order to access the level of offerings that another school may have because they have the size and scale right now at this current moment to offer that.
Okay. So if Duke Ellington was in Ward 8, how many people would go?
Well, Duke Ellington's such a draw. Maybe a lot of people would.
You just, as I said, I didn't know that Woodson offered the IT. It just surprised me. So that was interesting to me.
So I have a couple specific questions on the master facilities plan, Jen. I
Sure.
wanted to see what your thoughts are. One is on universal pre-K 3 and pre-K 4. We don't have the capacity at many of our schools in Ward 6 to offer seats to inbound families for pre-K 3 and pre-K 4. So if that is a priority for our community, is that something that can be looked at and figured out how to address in the master facility plan? And my second question is, even though now reservation 13 has switched to Ward 7, it used to be in Ward 6 before redistricting, and they're building a lot of housing on reservation 13. Is within the master facility plan, is anybody looking at what the needs are going to be for school children and schools in reservation 13, or are they all going to be assigned to like their closest DCPS schools, which is probably Payne and Tyler and maybe Watkins. Do you know how that's being addressed? It's
Yeah, I do. I can answer that. So there's a couple things. So I love the residential development stuff, right? So DME in our Edscape released sort of our housing pipeline, right? This is Office of Planning and a few private entities track the development. So sort of the time period, the number of units. And so we got another updated set of information from Office of Planning, and we are sharing that with our contractors, and we plan on updating Edscape as well. So to, yes, think about what's the time frame of these residential units, and then how many public school kids can we expect to come out of them. Office of Planning looks at the residential pipeline information when they do their small geography forecasts. And so we're relying on those demographers to come up with the forecasted numbers for the future. Not public school kids, right? But just kids, right? And then we sort of do our next step of then sort of saying, okay, what would the impact be on public schools? So the short answer is yes, we're excited and we're going to refresh all that. So reservation is 13 is a great point, and there's many other places across the city, right, where this is relevant. So that's one. So yes.
But in that, are they looking at whether there's a need for a school in those areas, or?
I see. I think, yes, we can look at it, but I think to our point before is, right, I think it was Valerie that was mentioning it, right? Our births have really slowed down. Our domestic at this moment, at least just 1 year past COVID, right? Our population has slowed down. And so, yes, we should look to see whether we need a whole new school. Per our conversation before, I don't think we're all thinking about adding to the supply of schools right now. So we'll consider it, but I think it's also where can it be absorbed? So I think that's one. But if we come back with the analysis, it says there's no way this needs to have a whole new boundaried school, we can certainly think about that. I would be a little surprised, but never say never. Last decade, I would have said maybe, but this decade doesn't seem to be, at least at this moment.
So
what may be
about
happening?
Universal pre-K3, pre-K4?
Yeah, so that's come up a bunch and in different parts of the city. So it's a hot topic. So we know, and Michelle probably knows this better than anyone, in aggregate, we have plenty of seats, but they are not in all of the right places. Right, so they're not all taking advantage of those seats for pre-K3 and pre-K4. And in some parts of the city, like in Ward 3, there is no pre-K3 at all, right, which comes up a lot. And so, yeah, we're going to be looking at early childhood and just looking and seeing what the capacity and how it fits. I'm going to give you another very specific example. In the middle of the city is Bancroft, right? So I do not believe, this is just me speaking, we'll have to see what happens in the end, that we're going to say that there needs to be compulsory pre-K3, pre-K4. Like, I don't see that policy changing per se, right? That you have to go to school at 3 or 4. I would be very surprised if we went down that road. But I do think, right, that this is an opportunity to serve our families. And so we're going to need to look at it. And what ends up happening, sorry, the reason I started thinking about this is what ends up happening is when a school starts getting really crowded, that's some of the first things that start to go, right? They start limiting the number of early childhood classrooms, right? In order to make room for compulsory grades. And that's happening. I'm gonna give you an example of Bancroft. That's certainly a topic that's very important right now to the Bancroft school. So I think, Suzanne, yes, that is something we're gonna be looking at. And it impacts differently across the city.
Well, I have a question for that. You just said that there's some that don't have enough students, and then there's some that has too many students. If you're trying to put your child in pre-K3 and where you live in your boundary is too crowded, are you going to tell me about Ward 2 that has opening, or is it my responsibility to find that? I mean, if there's areas where they don't have enough enrollment, what is happening with that as to letting someone know, well, you might not be able to go here, but there's an opening up there? Is that part of the plan?
So my school DC does share some of that information right now. And they publish on a weekly basis, I think, coming out of the lottery, a list that they call like their short wait list. So these are schools that have no students on their wait list, up to less than 10 students on the wait list. And so that is across the board for all grade levels, but certainly for pre-K, and an area that I know that my school DC team, particularly when families are calling after they're getting their wait list results or appointing families to.
And one more thing for that, if I'm out of my boundary and I'm at a pre-K 3, and then my siblings are coming in because I'm at the school, but then I live across the street and that's my boundary, and you're telling me you don't have one, but someone that's out of boundary, they're coming in based on the sibling. Is that still something? I hope I explained that in English that you understand. Is that something that's happening?
I think you're asking like if there's limited pre-K slots,
Mhm.
you are in boundary, someone
Mhm.
else is out of boundary but has sibling preference, do they get in before you?
Yes,
Is that what
that's
you're
it.
asking? No, the DCPS preferences go in order right now, and it starts with for pre-K, if you have an in-boundary preference, they actually stack it. Like if you have an in-boundary with sibling
Mhm.
preference, and then an in-boundary preference, and then sibling comes after that.
Oh, okay. That's something new, or that's the way it's always been?
I'm not gonna say always, but for
Now,
many.
Back in 2006, my kid was on the wait list as an out of boundary sibling. So that was a long time ago.
oh,
I think
okay,
it was
thank you.
2008. I don't remember.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think we're going to have to wrap up for the evening. We're at the end of our time. I want to thank you, Michelle and Jen, for staying on for the whole conversation. I think you can tell we have a lot of passion for these issues. And we are strong supporters of our by right schools. But we want everybody across the city to be able to want to go to their by right school, not just those of us in Ward 6. So I think there'll be in this coming year a lot of opportunities to talk about this with both the master facility plan and the student boundary and assignment process.
Sounds
So,
great. Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you
all
all.
for
Good night,
being on the
everybody.
line tonight.
Thank you all.